just move over if you're going to plan to sit in this area. That would be great. As we're getting ready for the first presentation, I just want to give a couple of reminders. First one, today we have all dissertation presentations. These are 30 minutes. 30-minute presentations followed by about 10 minutes of question time. And a reminder to continue to do the feedback. The link is up on the board. You can do that on your smartphone, computer, whatever. If you don't have one of those, I believe the green cards are in the back still. You can complete those and hand that to any of us. By the way, I'm Jeremy Solon, for those of you that I haven't met. I'm one of the graduate assistants on the planning team. That have worked to put this together. So you can hand one of those green sheets to me or James or Jen, or is Jen right here, and we can get those completed as well. The schedule for the morning, we have 2 dissertation presentations, and then there's about a 10-minute break between those, transition time between those. And then we have a musical interlude with Melanie, who has joined us. Welcome, Melanie. And then we will have 2 more presentations before lunch, before we go into lunch. So I think, unless there are any questions generally from everybody, anybody? Welcome to, you want to go?
Yeah, just one other thing. If you forgot to do feedback yesterday or Wednesday to key presentations, if you did, you can still go in and do it. And we would really appreciate any feedback for any of those presenters. It's really a gift to be able to provide that feedback as well. And we also have note cards if you want to give more detailed feedback that you would give on an online form. We have these white index cards all over the place. We have to do that and hand those directly.
And I'd especially like to welcome guests here. Looks like we have lots of guests of folks presenting their dissertations, so welcome to all of you. We're looking forward to a great day. Let's turn this over to Rick to introduce our first presenter.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Rick. I'm here today to introduce Dr. B. Nicolette Phear. Nicky and I have been working together for a number of years, not just with her dissertation, but she's been one of the spark plugs behind this annual symposium. It has an incredible amount of energy and creativity. So she deserves recognition for this. And normally, because we're on video here, I might introduce her committee members, but she's going to do it. She also asked me, what was I going to say about her? I promised not to say anything that she didn't appreciate. But I think the work that she has done at the University of Canada in Missoula is truly extraordinary. She's been teaching climate change, and she's introduced the idea of climate change and climate action to a campus and into the local community, which is remarkable that she has been able to collect in the community 100 leaders in various sectors who want to be involved in discussion and dialogue about climate change and what can be done locally and perhaps thinking beyond that. And that's the same for Nicky as well. We're encouraging her as her committee to think beyond where she is now and what it might be possible to do. And on a larger scale. And so we might also want to note that Nicky is not only an outdoor educator for outward bound instructor. She taught here at Preston College many years ago, and she's a mountain bike racer.
Wow.
With that, I'll turn it over to Nicky.
Thank you so much, Rick. Yes, and thank you for being my chair, Rick Medrick, and Dr. Denise Mitten is also on my committee, they both have really held me up through this process. Thank you for being in the front here. Yeah, this is a big day, it's a big week, it's a big moment. And I want to start by thanking my brother, Hugh, who's here with me. He came from Massachusetts to be here for this, for me. Our mother's not able, our father's passed away, and so it's really important for me that he's here. And he has been with me at poignant times in my life. Some of the most enjoyable have been at races, actually. Standing in the crowds as I cross the finish line, and he has this amazing ability to stand up and say, "That's my sister," as I cross the finish line. So this has felt like a major endurance event, and we're close to the finish. So for my brother, cohort 6, will you raise your hand to show who's been with me for this time? And I want to also give thanks to a couple of members from cohort 7, in particular James and Jeremy, who have enriched my experience to help me get to this point, so thank you. Virtually, my stepmother is watching. She's also supported me through life and made this education a possibility. Thank you, Bea. And my esteemed committee members, Dr. Karen O'Brien, who is a professor in Norway at the University of Oslo, and been a member of the IPCC committee, and also Dr. Lisa Pitlick-Zillig from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So they may be here with us. I want to offer gratitude to Prescott College. As Rick mentioned, I was a faculty member here in adventure education, and that gave me a foot in higher education teaching. And also, when I was considering a PhD program, this was really the only place that I considered. And it was in large part from having taught here and knowing that the college approaches education from both the head and the heart. And I knew that a PhD process would be incredibly demanding. To know at the roots there was that heart, I knew that it would help me get through the process. And I also knew that there would be space created for me to craft a research project exactly fitting to my interests, which it has. So this is the title of my dissertation, which you can read there. And I focus, as Rick mentioned, very intentionally on climate change education for the last 4 years at the University of Montana, where I'm a faculty member. I was able to help develop an undergraduate interdisciplinary program in climate change, which I now coordinate and teach for. So I wanted my research to have those elements. I wanted to be able to move forward with the climate change issue, find a way to engage my students, engage the community, and of course, to also engage scholarship in this process. So this is what really drives me, is a concern about climate change. I'm sure that is an issue of concern for many here as well. And whenever a new report comes out, like the most recent IPCC report, it gives me pause every time when I read about the extent and pace with which humans are transforming the planet. We've seen significant changes with only a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit rise in temperature in the last century. Is Claire here? Claire spoke as a farmer, changes she's seen on her farm due to extreme weather and drought. We've been reading in the news recently about large sections of West Antarctic ice sheet that has gone into irreversible retreat. Even if we stabilize greenhouse gas emissions today, climate scientists expect we could limit warming by the end of the century to 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. If we don't stabilize emissions and continue along business as usual, the amount of warming is expected to be between 5 and 8 degrees Fahrenheit, possibly 11. Scientists are concerned that our current emissions path will lead to global temperatures that will devastate the majority of ecosystems and destabilize human civilization. My committee member, Karen O'Brien, was an author on this, was a part of the working group too, and co-author on the report but focused on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And one of the major ideas that she's brought forward is that given the changes we're expected to see, there are limits to the ability for humans to adapt to those changes. And so she's put forward this idea that we really need deliberate transformation in order to avoid these dangerous changes in the Earth system. So in order to engage in some kind of transformation, we really need to understand the human context, because most of the uncertainty in terms of what will happen to the planet is relying on if humans act or not to reduce emissions. And this is what we're faced with from the human world, the human dimensions of climate change. We have a lot of doubt and denial in the U.S. public. Currently, 44% of the population in the United States does not believe that humans are a major driver of climate change. It's become an incredibly polarized issue politically, and increasingly people are seeing some of these divisions having to do with worldviews, and particularly regarding preferences about strategies or not strategies for reducing emissions. Oh, whoops. Even among those who agree the planet is warming is driven by human activity, Carrie Norgard has written this interesting book called Living in Denial. Many populations still, in effect, aren't doing anything about it, taking responsibility. And in a way, in many communities, there's a socially constructed form of denial where it's really not polite conversation, and there really aren't necessarily mechanisms or means to engage in collective action on it. And then there's a whole body of interesting literature related to the psychological and cognitive dimensions of climate change and some of the challenges we have. Daniel Gilbert out of Harvard has an interesting, fun quote here. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. So my literature review covers a lot of these human dimensions, political, cultural, psychological, social dimensions of climate change. And these aspects are really fascinating to me. And in fact, I wanted to focus my entire dissertation on this aspect. I was really interested in the phenomenon of denial and why people are opposed to taking action on climate change. And I decided to shift the focus of my conversation, of my research, rather than focusing on denial, trying to think about structures that we could create that could engage people from diverse perspectives and thinking about solutions that we could agree upon. So I got interested in this process of public deliberation as a pathway towards collaborative action. And you can see part of the reason why I was thinking about myself as an educator. I really like this quote here by Linda Eleanor and Glenna Gerald about our work as leaders. So what is public deliberation? So deliberation is really just a focused conversation. The intention is that you bring people together who represent a diversity of views and perspectives and give them an opportunity for a focused conversation to brainstorm ideas, better understand the ideas of others, come up with strategies for dealing with the issue at hand that can be agreed upon mostly by people, and in some ways possibly having some kind of influence on policy decision making. These forums have been increasing in popularity around the nation. In the last 15 years, there have been thousands of public deliberations on a lot of tricky societal issues related to racial tensions, healthcare, education, government budgets, and there have been some on climate, related to climate change, but not very many. People are interested in these processes because they've been found, at least theoretically, to help people move beyond hasty, first reactionary impressions to more informed, considered opinions. And that in this best, we can create some emergent possibilities that people might leave with ideas that they hadn't even considered before they came. There's been a fair amount, increasing amounts of research on the deliberative process. A lot of the research has looked at shifts in kind of aggregate opinion perspective for people who engage in these processes. And, but we haven't done there hasn't been a lot of literature to look at individual differences. How do people show up? How do they engage with these processes? How does that affect the outcome? I thought this was a really important question, particularly to climate change, because we know the issue of climate change brings up a lot for people. It's a highly emotional issue. It's a confusing issue. So what does it look like when people sit down to engage in deliberation about climate action? So here is the purpose of my research. And here are my specific questions, again, to fill some holes in the literature and also based on my interest and based on the interests of people that I work with on campus at the University of Montana and in the community. Kind of looking at the process, 3 different stages, the input. So what motivates people to show up to these deliberations? What are the reasons for spending 3 hours? These deliberations were 3 hours. Why would they come and talk for 3 hours about this issue? The process, once they're there, how do individuals engage? How does their engagement vary? And how does this affect the quality of the deliberation and the outcomes? Yesterday, James talked about the value of creativity and the need to foster these skills. So how creative were people in the deliberations to come up with new ideas? How willing and able were they to listen to the others? How much did frustrations shut down their thinking? How much were they oriented towards closing their own minds and thinking? So those are some of the areas I was able to look at through my research. And then in terms of the quality of the deliberation, as we know, deliberations are supposed to create a forum for people to generate ideas, weigh the pros and cons, and invite a diversity of perspectives. So there were some measures I had looking at the quality of deliberations from the individual's perspective as well as from the moderators. And then the output, we really, it's not just about getting people together to talk, but does this have an impact? And I was particularly interested in how effective these deliberations were in building a sense of agency, and also, beyond the individual, how effective were they in generating collaborative action ideas to address climate change. Oh, no, right. So the methodology I used was action research. This was an appropriate methodology because I was interested in both creating these forums for deliberation and also researching that process. Action research is an exciting method that brings together action and reflection. It advances both practice and theory, and it helps the pursuit of solutions to issues that people are concerned about. And it generally has those components which you'll see illustrated as I talk through my research. Another aspect of action research is it generally involves 3 cycles. Each one has an element of planning, element of action, element of reflection. So what I was able to do is, over the course of a year and a half, I worked with community members to plan 3 deliberations. It took about 2 or 3 months to organize each one, and then we did the deliberation again. There were these 3-hour events, and then we talked about them afterwards, got input from the participants, from the moderators, and then came up with our plan for the second one and then the third one. And so I'll show you a picture from each of them. This was the first one that we did at the University of Montana. We have a climate action plan at the university, but really there's been very little engagement from students and others to actually kind of build momentum behind this climate action plan. And so what I did is I went across campus and I tried to recruit students who could help inform did they want the university to move forward with the plan, how could they be involved. And I knew that I should try to get students who weren't just from the typical environmental studies programs. So I actually went to the business school, I went to a lot of different departments and tried to recruit students to participate in this conversation. I ended up with undergraduate students from 22 different majors, a lot from environmental studies, wildlife biology, but also business, journalism, computer sciences. And the focus was to brainstorm strategies for becoming a carbon neutral campus, and importantly, the role students could play individually and collectively to advance strategies. So what was interesting to me is they came up with technical ideas related to transportation and building efficiency and wind and biomass and solar for energy. But then a lot of the conversation really had to do with the only way we're really going to advance and get towards our goals is through education empowerment of the students. And so that actually informed the second deliberation that we had 6 months later, where we realized to think about these ideas about how do we educate and empower across sectors of campus. It couldn't just be undergraduate students we involved. We had to broaden the group convened. So this next one involved around each table not just students, but also staff, faculty, and administrators from campus. And the question focused on how do we strengthen connections between education, operations to advance sustainability and UM's climate action plan. And what was great is we were able to recruit the university president, the directors of facility services, the engineering director, the campus architect, the energy manager, the sustainability coordinators, and then in terms of education and student life, the director of residence life, Office of Student Success, internship services director, someone from the foundation. We had the farm to college coordinator, deans of several colleges, and the student president and vice president. So we had people who had positions of influence across campus in different sectors who agreed to show up. And that was what was interesting, like putting the invitation out, and we worked really hard to craft personalized invitations to say, your participation is important, this is an important campus conversation, please come. And actually what we found is that at all 3 deliberations, people not only showed up, but they showed up early, and they often caught us off guard because they were there sitting in their seats ready to go before we were ready. So for this second one, I knew that I wanted to try to move this process off campus and into the community. So I actually invited, as every table had a bunch of participants and then 1 moderator and 1 note taker. So I invited 5 members from our community to come and moderate this process so they get to see the process, experience it, learn how it works, learn how it could work better. And then we had discussions about, could we do this in our community? And they were excited about the process. And so another 6 months later, we had one in downtown Missoula, and again went through the same process to think about what would be an important question to ask and who would be important people to have. And so at this deliberation, we focused on what are your big ideas for the community, for community climate action, and how can we make these big ideas happen. We already had a climate action plan for the city, but we hadn't extended our boundaries to think about the larger Missoula community. And it turned out a lot of people wanted to come to this event. That's our mayor in the middle there. We had people from economic development areas of the city, county planning board, water quality district, Montana Water Company, Montana Rail Link, U.S. Forest Service, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, some of the tribes, and conservation group representatives from local foods, land conservation, low-income housing, health, economic development, and more. So a lot of people were interested in coming. And this is the data I collected. So I was interested in the perspectives of both the participants and then also the people who were moderating the events. Of the participants, we had a pre and post survey, and asking them kind of some descriptions about, what's your gender, what's your political ideology, because I know that that can really drive different perspectives and beliefs about climate change. What's their concern about the issue? What's their knowledge about it? I had some knowledge questions. What do they think their ability was to affect change? And then the post survey asked some questions about, well, how did you feel like you engaged in this deliberation? Did you feel creative? Did you feel frustrated? Did you feel angry? Did you feel like you were, open to the other perspectives? Asked them about the quality of the deliberation. Asked them again about their sense of efficacy to affect change. I asked moderators and note takers as well to help me evaluate the process. I had a note taker. They actually were all undergraduate students of mine from the Climate Change Studies program, so they were ready to help and learn from the process. And they took notes as best they could, verbatim what people were saying. I couldn't record the deliberations because it was too loud. People could hardly even hear themselves or others at their table. But they took notes, and then the moderators I had them evaluate the process, the engagement afterwards. And then we had some focus group meetings. I recorded 3 of them, but we actually had more than that to debrief. And then we had a lot of organizational meetings. I took notes of those. This is a fun. Okay, so how did I analyze the data? So I had all this quantitative data that was basically, as you can see here, like numerical data. And then I had all this text that was, from the open-ended questions on the survey, the table notes, the other kinds of evaluations. So I did analyze both of those separately. Even though I had 3 stages of deliberation, I analyzed the data at the end after all of it, because I had similar questions at every single deliberation. So this was actually the most fun for me, was learning how to do the quantitative data analysis. And if I could help any of you in this, I offer my help. And Carrie, if you're here, yes, I'd love to help you. But it was really interesting for me to to use these different forms of analysis to try to understand what were some of the patterns that were happening. You know, I used descriptive statistics to get a sense for general characteristics of the participants. I used univariate, multivariate statistic procedures to analyze factors that predicted engagement and deliberation quality. And then I could use analysis of variance to compare differences in types of engagement and deliberation across individuals, tables, and deliberative events. And then also paired sample t-tests to compare differences in scores pre and post deliberation. So it was really fun to learn how to do that. And then and with the qualitative data, I used a process of coding for and finding themes. And then I was able to compare the two. Sometimes they agreed, sometimes they didn't. The quantitative pieces helped me see things I couldn't necessarily see with my own eyes. And then the qualitative pieces helped give some description to that. So my results in a few different areas related to motivation, the process, and the output. And what I'm going to talk about is 5 things that emerged from this research in terms of what seemed to matter for an effective deliberation about climate change. So the first of the 5 had to do with motivation. So motivations really mattered. A lot of the people that came indicated, and I was kind of surprised by how forcefully they expressed that they were there due to a sense of moral or civic responsibility. Many of them said that climate change was the biggest issue of our day, #1 threat to humanity. They felt personally responsible, that they should be, and they wanted to be involved in making a change. The research shows that moral responsibility is a driver for other kinds of environmental behaviors. And it was interesting to see that this is a driver as well for engaging in deliberation about climate change. And many people are actually motivated to do something about climate change, don't know what to do. And so I think it was particularly a great opportunity for people who really cared about this issue to come and try to think about strategies. But then there were other reasons for participating. 23% spoke a lot about their care for the place, that they wanted to get involved in local action and see local leadership, a lot of pride in the area, a lot of investment in campus and the community. So I'd like to say here that sense of place is a motivator for action. That's Jeremy's research. You can cite me. And then here, 20% simply came to learn. They wanted to learn about the issue. They didn't know enough. This is an opportunity to learn, and not just learn about it from the information that might be provided through a resource panel or an information guide, but to learn from others. A chance to sit down and talk with people from other sectors, across campus, or across the community, and this is a way to learn what other people are doing and learn from others. Kind of related to that, I was surprised that 14% of the people said that they came because it was a part of their work. We had people from the tribes there who said they'd been told to work on climate change adaptation. They were thinking, well, how do I do this? How do I work with others? There were people from the city who had to implement their climate action plan. There were conservationists who were told through their work that they had to come up with priority areas for conservation. So people are increasingly having climate change a part of their work. And in order to do it effectively, actually they have to work with others across their own area organization. In addition, if more people can have climate change be a part of their work, then it gives people the time and opportunity to actually work on this issue. And then 13% said they came because they were invited. And I found this interesting that people said, I came because my faculty invited me, my supervisor encouraged me to come, I came because the invitation was great, came because, and I think this speaks to people want to belong, right? They want to participate, and Woody talked about some of those basic needs, and I think if we can think about some of these processes, not just in addition to kind of serving the moral and responsibility that people have, they can also serve some of these other needs to belong, participate, learn, and create together. So next finding had to do with knowledge that, I'm going to just put these ones up here, it really seemed to matter the knowledge people had. People came up with more effective ideas about how to address climate change when they had the knowledge of the science. Students who talked about recycling, that's not necessarily going to affect reducing emissions. So there is an element to have high quality deliberation. There is a degree of knowledge that's important. But as importantly is to have diverse perspectives. The moderators and note takers talked a lot about how it was important to have these different perspectives. And even some of the conservative students, I like this one. I had one student in my group who was a computer science major, and his ideas differed from the others. I think that having a student less on board than the majority really helped the other students think outside the box. And then from another deliberation, the fact that participants came from different areas of employment and expertise helped them engage, because whatever information one individual didn't have, another could fill in and keep the ball rolling. It made for a really coherent conversation. So these forums allow for learning, and really the two-way learning was important for them. So you can create the space, right, for people to come and engage and think about strategies. But what we found in this, what I found, was that it really mattered how people engage, and people have different capacities and traits to engage cognitively and effectively. So looking at my quantitative data, there was quite a difference. Those who felt more creative and active in their engagement, and including those who were least frustrated or angry in their participation for this highest quality deliberations. And when I looked, like, what does that mean when people are creative and active in their conversations? There were some tables just had a lot of this energy, and really they were approaching the conversation from a sense of, like, we could, like, we can versus they should. They had this sense of agency, like, okay, here's the problem. How do we then work around the problem to create new structures and address it? I had one legislator say, well, you know, if you don't like the law, you change it, you create a new one. So that was really what I heard there. There were other tables that kind of got stuck in this negative spiral. They probably said, you know, focused on problems, and they moderated despite the encouraging the participants to think about solutions. It seemed like they could really just, they got stuck there. And then this was interesting that across the board, a bunch of the tables had individuals, and particularly ones who were most concerned about the issue of climate change, felt more strongly about their own ideas than those of others. And as a note taker reported, this was interesting because this is ironic given their common understanding that there's a need for collaboration. So the sense of, like, my idea for a strategy for how we deal with this is the most important strategy. It was quite distracting for others, and people will experience this kind of dogmatic engagement. So agency matters too, and I have just two more. And this is, I asked participants how able they felt they were to affect change. And what I was interested to find is that at every single deliberation there was a significant difference in people's sense that they could affect change. And people actually who entered the deliberation with a greater sense of efficacy reported feeling more creative and engaged in the process. And on average, each of them, there was an increase. Looking specifically at some of the differences, what was interesting for me is that women had an even greater change in sense of efficacy. They came in feeling less able to affect change than men, and then by the end they were on par. And it was a more significant, there was a greater impact on people who were younger. In the earlier age categories, there were significant changes in efficacy, but not with the older people. So I was not looking for gender differences, and I tried to ignore them, but these findings kept coming up through my study. And what was interesting is that the women reported feeling more creative and active in engagement, more open, focused, less angry, more interested in the topic. And as we saw, there was a bigger influence in terms of the impact on them in terms of their sense of agency. And one of the things I think influenced this was that almost all of the deliberations were led by women. So they were convened by me or other women in the community. Every single table, of all the 33 tables we had, 30 of them were moderated by women. Almost all the note takers were women. It was women that sustained their engagement from one deliberation to the next. Research shows that deliberative processes, if there's an equal number of men and women will be less involved. But if you have a majority of women, they become more involved. So this speaks to the importance, if you want to bring voice to a minority, you may need to have more of a majority present. If we wanted to give more voice to conservatives, we probably would have had to have more of a majority of conservatives there. So next steps. So this wasn't part of my research, but on Monday, we actually convened our second Community Climate Summit. It's really nice to see that this has a momentum beyond my research. We had 120 participants come. We looked at the ideas from the first Community Climate Summit in different areas. People talked about transportation, land use, energy efficiency, education. So we created these buckets and invited people to come participate in different buckets based on topic areas that were particularly interesting to them. And our idea was to look at all the strategies that people had come up with in the past for the different forums and then prioritize those. And we had a prioritization process, and you can see people here very engaged in talking about what they thought a particular strategy would reduce emissions, increase preparedness, if we had momentum, if it was practical. And by the end of this process, we came up with a few ideas in each different bucket, and basically we've created a community-driven climate action plan that has the endorsement of 120 people who are participating, including, as we said, a bunch of the community leaders. So here are some conclusions that, based on my purpose, that it does seem like we can facilitate new structures to enable dialogue, and that effective deliberation may require tapping into individual motivations, developing individual capacity to engage, knowledge about action strategies, and individual agency. And I think this last one is important to me, that we focus, the literature and decision makers are so focused on the denial and the doubt about the climate change issue. And even when I tell people about the work that I do, it's almost like they just instantly go into, oh, is that happening? And just kind of in a facetious way. But I'd like to just create more of a storyline. You were talking about stories earlier, that there actually are, there are possibilities, and people do show up, and there are people who are interested to engage and thoughtful and constructively with issues. So my collaborators, I want to thank from the community there, and also all the moderators and note takers, one of our funders. And then to my committee, Rick Medrick, who offered, heart through this whole process. He was the one that encouraged me to come, and I came because he was so inviting to me. It was the invitation and the belonging, so thank you. Denise for picking me up when I fell down and carrying me through. And then Karen O'Brien may be with us virtually from the University of Oslo. And here's a picture in Norway last summer. She invited me out to an international conference on transformation in a time of climate change. And then my amazingly brilliant research scientist from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Dr. Lisa Pitlick-Zillig, who helped me with the research design, analysis, and the write-up. And then others who have helped me along the way. So, that's it.
So, questions for Nicky?
And if we don't have time for all the questions, if there's a little note card, you can jot your question or thought down on that.
Thank you so much for this. I'm wondering how the deliberations were facilitated. Like, how did you set it up, and what sort of instructions did you give them for the table?
Yeah, well, we had a training for all the moderators and note takers beforehand, and the way we had is every event was 3 hours. We had a resource panel to start with to kind of lay the context, and then most of the time was taken up in the small groups. And there were 3 questions at every deliberation. The first one was kind of to evoke kind of some sharing, appreciation, what's going on, what do we like, and then brainstorming possible ideas, and then the last question always had to do with, like, how do we make these ideas happen? And there was times throughout for people to report out from each table, so each table could hear the ideas from the other tables. And that was basically how it worked. But all the moderators had some training in kind of group decision making, and the ways that group decisions go from kind of into this divergent zone, and to not get to feel like something's going wrong if the conversation seems like it's like going out of control, but that their job was to help come to some kind of convergence. And it not necessarily with the intention that everyone would agree at the end. And there were some guidelines for having respectful conversation that were on the tables that all the moderators went through before the conversation started. We can talk more.
Who's next to you?
I had to step out, so I might have missed this, but could you talk a little bit about how you craft the invitation, especially for, I'm thinking back to Eric's presentation, resistance participants. What language did you come to make it open for people who might find climate change more problematic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this was an important conversation, not that we had a certain agenda, but this is a timely issue. We're going to be moving on it. We want a diversity of perspectives to inform how we move forward. But we did have, particularly at the first conversation, some students who just were not interested. And it wasn't necessarily that they were wanting to debate if climate change happened, but it just wasn't a priority for them. And they were kind of passively disinterested. And that created a little bit of awkwardness at the table. It was interesting because there were some differences, because there was one table where a student came in who was actually actively kind of combative about it. You know, he perceived himself as from the business department, a bunch of environmental students, like, you don't get it. And then the moderator was able to kind of actually he did care and incorporate his ideas, and he ended up being a real great contributor to the conversation. I think there were other tables where the moderator didn't necessarily know that the people who felt differently at the table weren't as effective as bringing those in.
Thanks, this is fantastic. A quick question, could you provide any anecdotal thoughts around messaging in climate change, and if there are those there's a sort of visceral negative response to those two words, if you lead with something like energy efficiency or utility cost savings, even though the primary goal is greenhouse gas emissions mitigation, climate change, but if you lead with other messages with sort of climate change in the background to maybe mitigate some of that immediate negative response to sort of any thoughts you had.
Yeah, well, they're finding, that Tea Partiers and environmentalists are actually coming together with their common interest in renewable energy. Get us off of the distributed, get us into more independently sourced energy. So that is effective for working with other populations. So yeah, it's a motivator for some, but it's a turn off for others.
Nicky,
Yeah.
Great talk, great presentation, great research. How do you deal with your own issues related to the slowness of the deliberative process and the speed with which the biogeochemical cycles are moving? So when the issue and these potential solutions are so out of sync in terms of rhythm, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I actually think you cannot work on climate change without doing this. I mean, I can't measure all the impacts, but I know there were many ripple effects from this. One example is we invited the county commissioners, and then there was an issue that came up around county planning, and the county wanted to put climate change in there, that we will consider climate change in future growth planning processes. And the Association of Realtors came in and said, no, you can't consider this because we don't know, there's too much uncertainty. And one of the county commissioners said, well, I was actually part of this process, and it is an important thing, and I was a part of writing the plan, and it's going to be in the planning process. And so people participating in this process will then affect change in their own communities, in part because of being a part of it. Another city representative said it was really good for him to be a part of the process because usually all he hears are the voices of rural people who doubt and deny. And to be part of a process where they see people who, a large segment of the population that are in positions of power, care about this issue, gave him the personal power to work on these issues. So I actually don't think this is slow. I think there were actually some pretty significant impacts I couldn't necessarily measure that came out of it.
Okay,
Okay, we're done.
unfortunately, we're out of time for questions.